Hello and welcome to the Nonprofit Leaders Network podcast. Sherrie Deans, Executive Director of National Basketball Players Association Foundation, will be sharing with us today about the steps they took to formalize their foundation and begin to focus on intentional impact. Before we jump into that conversation, I'd like to share a little bit about today's sponsor. Donately is the simplest way to take donations online. With no fixed monthly cost or setup fees, it's easy to see why over 1,000 organizations trust Donately to improve their online fundraising. Sign up for free today at donately.com/leaders.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Leaders Network podcast, where your host, KIRSTEN Bullock, interviews nonprofit CEOs and executive directors who share what's working. Show notes can be found at nonprofitleadersnetwork.com. Please add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or iTunes. Now, let's get on with the show.
Hi, Sherrie. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Hi, Kirsten. How are you? Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Sherrie Deans is the Executive Director for the NBPA Foundation, the charitable arm of the NBPA, the union, for the nearly 450 current professional basketball players in the NBA. Deans brings highly regarded C-level experience in celebrity philanthropic engagement, as well as global financial services, having held posts with Living Cities, AIG, MBNA, and American Express. In her role as executive director, the first executive director for the NBPA Foundation, she oversees the philanthropic efforts of the union and supports the individual efforts of players as impact investors, charitable donors, and community change makers, both domestically and internationally. She has a BA in economics and political science from Columbia University, and currently she lives in the Bronx with her husband and son. Sherrie, could you go ahead and kick us off and share a little bit about the NBPA Foundation?
Sure. The MBPA Foundation is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. We were founded to, as you mentioned, support the philanthropic interests of the NBA players. So we are connected, heavily connected to the union that negotiates their working conditions. But we have a unique opportunity to support them as individuals. And we have grants that are available, matching grants that are available for players that are doing work in the community, either for organizations that they support or organizations that they founded. We also are the historians of the union, so we have an archival historian role that we play in recording the legacy, making sure that's well documented from a player perspective. And so we've made investments that you would expect for a group that is trying to make sure that sort of the past is documented well. We focus on that as well. And then we give on behalf of the players. So if there are initiatives that we think they should be involved in collectively, or they tell us they want to be involved in collectively, we fund on their behalf too. So sometimes that's natural disasters. Sometimes those are large-scale projects that seem to bubble up from the group as a common interest. And so we give heavily to sports and organizations that focus on play, because that's obviously a key interest of our players. And it's also something that people don't talk about a lot anymore. But for this group of individuals, the opportunity to play a sport, and most of them played many sports throughout their careers, is life-changing and sets about for healthy practices, both in their lives long term, as well as in the classroom for health issues, for behavioral issues. So we're very heavily involved in funding for sports as well.
Fantastic. And you had mentioned earlier when we chatted that you've been there about 2 years, and you're the first executive director for this organization. Have any of the programs changed or shifted since you started?
Drastically. I'm technically the first employee for the foundation. The foundation was set up as a byproduct of a negotiation, a collective bargaining agreement that happened 20 years ago, once the fines that players were being charged started to get larger, there was a question about where that funding should go. And collectively, the league and the union decided that the fund should go to philanthropic purposes. So the fines are split between us and the union, between us and the league. Naturally, a nonprofit had to be set up to collect those funds. So that's how it started. And I think for much of the 20 years, the funds were quite limited, so it didn't need a full-time staff person to manage it. And then it just, I think people essentially sort of forgot about it on some level. The foundation would move forward, making relatively a small number but large amount of grants, usually to the Red Cross or to some kind of natural disaster that occurred, to ensure that we were, hitting our minimums in terms of payout. But there was no strategy. There was no ability for players to direct funding. We really didn't have philanthropic objectives or a funding strategy. That didn't happen. What did happen is that it allowed for the amount of money to grow, and then it got to a place where it was large enough for it to really have the ability to, not only the need for management, but the ability to do something really impactful and support our players in a very different way. And I was brought in to figure out what that new vision could be. And so that's been a real honor to serve in that role, and to grow the foundation, grow the vision for the foundation, figure out how the players wanted it to work, and how to make it sustainable.
Right. So do you have a advisory council, a board that you work with?
Sure. We have a board. In our bylaws, certain members of the executive committee of the union are automatically serve as our board members, and then we have the ability to go up to 9 board members. So whether they are players or other people that we select, we're currently we're about to announce our 5th board member. Our hope is that by the end of this calendar year, we'll get to 7. And then hopefully, next year we'll get to the 9. And we are really going out to the player population primarily right now because we want their voice reflected and informing the strategy that we're taking.
So was it difficult to make the shift from just kind of giving some money here and there to things that were unrelated to being focused? And
yeah, it really was. I mean, because you're starting, I guess some people would argue that starting with nothing is probably a better place to start. But you really do have the world in terms of options, and narrowing those options is not very easy. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about, well, should we do this or should we do that? Why should we make that grant? Why would we support that organization? How long are we going to support this organization? Are we going to fund programs? Or are we going to fund general operating support? Are we going to request that our brand be up front? Or are we going to request that, are we going to sort of sit in the background? Are we going to have an open grant process or a closed grant process? I mean, everything was a question. And then, as I mentioned to you before, we also, I consider ourselves on some level much like a family foundation. So we have, 400 and almost 50 donors to the foundation that are currently in the league, and then we have thousands of players who have contributed over the last 20 years who are out of the league. And so how do you interact with that population of people who have been instrumental in growing the fund that you're put in place to manage? It was very difficult. It remains a very difficult challenge. I have this nightmare that we're going to run out of money at any moment. But then I also sometimes feel like a Scrooge, saying, no, I think that's a line that we don't want to cross. Because, you worry about making a donation this year and the expectations that you're going to do it next year, and then you don't do it next year. You don't want to seem fickle as a funder, or we don't, at least. And so you have to be really thoughtful in the beginning, because we know that organizations start expecting support, as they should. So we're really trying to be thoughtful about our decision making up front. so we can not be disruptive as funders, and disruptive in a bad way at least.
What were some of the processes that you went through to start adapting some of those changes? Did you take it to the board and talk through it? Were there strategy planning sessions, or was it something that you did?
We did have to take a lot of it to the board. I mean, the difficulty was that there was such a gap that so much of it had to be done simultaneously. New bylaws, we had to really try to figure out what had happened over the last 20 years, so recreating your history. So it's awkward to have somebody call and say, you funded us before, and you have no, you don't really have any documentation of what went into the funding, so you're piecing together the financial trail, but you don't have the sort of what was the theory that went behind it. So that was difficult. We had to quickly, gauge sort of where the players were, what kind of process would facilitate their maximum engagement. We also, sort of constantly live with the reality that our financial assets are not our only assets. So, I spent a lot of my time at the Admiral Center talking about harnessing the power of celebrity, and the other asset that we have access to as a foundation is the amazing appeal and the megaphone that our members have. And so how are we going to engage with that? How were we going to be directing them, or were we going to be supporting them? How would we meet their interests in a way that could help them maximize the impact that they were taking? We also, have to acknowledge that these are young philanthropists. These are people that are, in the first, on average, first 5 years of their giving. And I don't think there's any 20-year-old who has an evolved philanthropic strategy.
Right.
You being a millionaire doesn't make that automatic. And so, we also had to figure out how to pace our interaction with them and meet them where they were as individuals, and not be judgmental or disparaging, but that figuring out what your philanthropic legacy and your impact is going to be is going to take time, and creating the supports to help them develop that, and then creating the protections around them so that people wouldn't lead them too fast, too far. So all of that had to be done. At the time, it felt simultaneously, but we had to get some basic things in place as we started to let players know that we were here to support them. And we're constantly adding new features and and extending our capacity in ways to be better donors, be a better grant-making institution, but also to provide better supports for the people that we are giving on behalf of.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Did you know online donations increased about 8% in 2016? Perfect your donor's experience with Donately so you don't have to miss out on any more donations online. Donately's custom donation forms and focused landing pages are engineered to turn visitors into donors. Sign up today at donately.com/leaders and save $500 on your first 100,000 raised. So let's shift gears a little. And one of the first, I don't know if it's one of the first programs, but one of the programs that you started, I guess, wasn't really as a program at all. It was just trying to capture some of the history of the organization with the Everyday Dad initiative.
Yeah, I would say it was one of our first projects. I mean, you're not wrong in saying that. It happened pretty early in the first 6 months of me taking over.
And so it started as more an archival task of tracking history, but then it shifted a little as you started rolling out. Could you share a little bit about what that program is and what it's shifting to?
Sure. So Everyday Dad is a project that started, I would say, June of 2015, and it was a storytelling project, really. We were inspired after a meeting at All-Star Weekend in New York City when we met with the Fathers Group. So there's an NBA Dads group, and you've got a collection of fathers who have sons in the NBA. And they get together and meet, and they work together as well as exchange advice on how to best support their sons as they take on this, really unique profession. And they were just sharing with me how some of the things that bothered them about their existence. One being that people often dismissed their relationship with their sons, that those relationships were rarely celebrated, that people just assumed that all of their sons sort of came up in the projects. They had mom on welfare, no one to support them, and they pulled themselves up by the bootstraps, and they made it into the league. And here you have this room full of fathers who said, "I've been coaching my son since he was 5. I took him to all of his practices. I moved him into college. I have a normal relationship with my son." And then the other thing that they said is, they don't all have just kids in every city that they don't take care of, which is, for a father who's wonderfully proud of his son, watching his son become a dad and be a good father, it really burns them that people have that perception about them. And I started to think about what could we do, right? Because that is the reality, that is the perception. It's not the reality, but it is the perception. And so, we started our effort at storytelling, and our first video was with Harvey Grant, who is a retired player he now has 2 sons in the league, but at the time, one of his sons was playing in Philadelphia for the Sixers, and the other was at Notre Dame. And so, but he had 5 boys or 4 boys. And he was so proud of all of them. Their relationship was so beautiful. And there was something powerful about recording it with no ulterior motives. We weren't selling anything. But we just had them talk about their relationships as dads. And that became clear that there was an everyday nature to who they were, that there were common hopes and dreams and fears. And that led to a collection of 6 videos. And then for the guys who, we were not able to do the videos for, we asked them to share pictures that they had never released before. And in those pictures, you could see the normalcy of their relationships and the deep nature of their relationships. We put that together into a coffee table book. And now 2 years later, we're starting to see what the potential programmatic integration could be for Everyday Dad. We worked with the city of New Orleans in February to include our Everyday Dad content into the curriculum that they were rolling out for their fathers groups that are going to be starting throughout the city. There'll be 12 support groups for dads who have been disconnected from their kids. And so it was wonderful content for the city from what they shared with us, because there actually is very little of that recorded. There's very little of just content and video talking about relationships between fathers and children. And so I think that is going to lead us down another path, and we're really excited where it's gone. And we're excited that the players love doing it. They love being a part of it.
And so would you say these resources might be available for other organizations who are supporting dads?
Absolutely. I mean, so the content is public. It's on our website, everydaydad.mbpa.com. So it's all available to be used, and we'd love people to use it however they see fit. And we're also looking for, our next group of videos will be a little bit more topical. The first set were just about general relationships. Our next video will be with Karan Butler. And it's really about how to father your son who wants to follow in your footsteps. And so, we ask him about, providing support to his son without being overbearing, without being too domineering, without pushing it on him. I think that's not a unique experience, even though Karan obviously made it to a very elite level. I think dads struggle with that in general. Not having your dreams for your kid overshadow their own dreams for themselves. So next group is going to be a different kind of content. And then we also were able to gather video content and photographic content from the New Orleans dads that we worked with. So we'll start interspersing NBA players and just normal dads into the content that we collect.
Nice. That's exciting. I look forward to hearing how that goes.
Yeah, I'll let you know.
Now, we've talked about some things that went really well. Now, let's visit the opposite side of that, because we all have experiences where things just don't quite work as planned. We might call it a failure, we might call it a learning experience, but do you have any situation like that you might be willing to share?
Yeah, I think the one that comes to mind would probably not be called a failure by most of the people that watched it from the outside. But afterwards, what we reflected on is, did what we set out to do matter? While we successfully executed a project, did it leave an impact in the place that we were working in, and did we even really have clarity on what the impact would be? And so before we started, the example that I have is summer before last, we had the great opportunity of going to South Africa with our players who were participating in the first NBA game being played on the continent. And we were still a new foundation. We were, less than a year old. But we were committed to sort of ensuring that we had a philanthropic blueprint wherever our players were going collectively. So here you have almost 30 players going to South Africa. It would make sense that you would do something. But we had, at the time, very limited bandwidth. So didn't have any deep relationships with nonprofits in South Africa. We had a few, so we did a few court renovations, but we wanted to do something a little bit more substantial, and we decided to launch a contest to take a group of high school players with us who had demonstrated deep commitment to their community, in addition to them being basketball players. And the kids went with us, and a child and parent, and had a fantastic time. Who wouldn't? Spending a week with a group of NBA players in South Africa, and we got great press. But when we came back, the question was, what did we do? What was the philanthropic purpose? Did we have an impact outside of just on the lives of these three kids? And was the impact that we had on these three kids meaningful and sustainable? And I'm not sure that we ever have been clear on what that answer is. And that was unfortunate, because the investment, both time and money, was significant. And so it was a learning experience for us, because you start to then really think about not getting caught up in the flashiness of an idea, and making sure that you're at your core, you're thinking about impact, and you're thinking about what's meaningful. I won't say that I wish it never happened, because, we're still in touch with those three young people, and, one of them has gone on to college, and they're great. They're great kids. And I think this will be a memory that they'll keep with them forever. But I think we have a responsibility to make sure that the work that we're doing and the time that we're spending is well spent. And so, I think we continue to use that example as sort of a rubric by which we measure other things. And, an instance where you seemingly succeeded, but it may not have been that great of an accomplishment.
And I think a lot of our listeners can probably relate to that. It's so easy to get caught up in the moment and, oh yeah, let's do it.
It felt good. It felt so good. Yeah.
But it's so important to be intentional. Do you have any closing words to provide inspiration or encouragement for other executive directors?
Yeah, I think, one of the things I'm trying to constantly do now is think about what's next. We've grown our staff from the one person, me, to three, and that feels great, because there's more capacity, and we can do things easier. But I don't think we should ever be comfortable that we've sort of arrived at a place. I think there's always opportunity for us to be expanding what we're doing, to be innovating. And then even when you get there, though, I think there's as a funder, I do want to make long-term commitments. I want people to be able to count on us. I don't want our donors to feel like they've got to constantly come up with a flashy new thing if they're doing really, really solid work and their model is working. So figuring out the balance between innovation and reliability and stability, I think is going to be difficult. But we're committed to striking it, and so I encourage everyone who's one who has some ideas on how to strike it. Please let me know. But also to really think about that, because I think in the environment that we're in right now, organizations are going to need us to be pretty stable and committed long term. So it's going to be incumbent upon us to do that.
Fantastic. Well, Sherrie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Kirsten.
You're welcome. And thanks to all our listeners for everything you do to make the world a better place.
Thanks for listening to the Nonprofit Leaders Network podcast with Kirsten Bullock. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll check out our prior episodes and that you'll pass along our web address, nonprofitleadersnetwork.com, to your friends and colleagues in the nonprofit sector.